Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this user group session. We're very excited to go over diagramming and live maps and to see if you personally have different ways to make diagrams. Today, we'll have our support manager, Chris Millay, and our technical manager, Justin Borrichter, hosting the session. Just to go over how it works, the session will be broken down into two parts. The first part will be Justin and Chris explaining how to diagram in live maps. After the presentation, we'll open the floor up for discussion. You can raise your hand by pressing the hand button, and we'll unmute you so that you can voice your questions or thoughts. You can also type in the chat, so there are multiple ways of doing this. With that said, we'll begin our session now. So Justin and Chris, the floor is yours.
Welcome everybody. It's Chris.
And Justin.
Yeah.
We're back at it, and this time we're coming from sunny Ottawa in Canada.
Yeah.
No one believes that, but it is actually warm and nice here at the moment. So Chris, you've got the agenda up on there?
Yeah, the questions that we get are regarding diagramming. So we want to kind of explain how diagramming works in live maps, showing drill downs, how we handle, Visio diagrams, kind of combining diagrams and service maps. A lot of people don't know that you can, especially when you talk about a service map, everything starts out as a list. You can convert it into a diagram. Of course, you can also convert a diagram back to a list. And cloning dashboards, that's kind of an interesting way to create templates and things of that nature. So with that said.
So where we're heading to right now for the diagramming section that we're doing in live maps, this is going to be a live maps authoring console heavy session.
Yeah.
So this is the back end. As the people who know me, this is the back end of live maps. This is the part that we did a session a couple of months ago, time flies, where we talked a little bit about what this can bring you. Now, diagrams, we get asked a lot of times to dive into this. This is really where you get super control over your data and how you show it and display it within the systems. So as you can see, to view it, Chris is now jumping to the web portal, and this would be a typical example of a good diagram.
Yeah, this is one. You can see any of the diagrams you create within the authoring console. You can see them both in the portal or in the SCOM console. So you kind of have both areas that you can see a diagram. This is one that's actually created with our Veritas out-of-the-box service. This was actually in the application section. I went ahead and copied it over, mainly because it shows a little bit of workflow, not only drilling down into sub-dashboards, giving you icons, trying to give you the overall picture. A lot of people have seen the Exchange one that we have in our Exchange app service, the 2013, which also handles 2016. We find that most people want to diagram things out to actually show workflow, as well as, so this one actually doesn't have a lot of tiles on it. That's kind of the reason why I wanted to show it. This is a CRM one that we'd done, just kind of giving more of examples. This actually drills down into websites or databases. The hard part about diagramming is usually it's your imagination that kind of controls it. And this one's actually considered a simple one. Uses just basically some tiles, uses a few icons, but that's it. It's basically kind of giving you almost like a knock screen type of view where you drill down. Now, I re-replicated what I saw at a customer site. This one is kind of an example. I didn't do it to its full extent, so one of you may recognize this. I obviously didn't copy it verbatim, but I wanted to show how someone had actually gone through and parsed through what they had seen from the external. This one actually wasn't in a service, but showing as you cross the boundaries, but then also showing some performance data. We have the ability to show performance data directly on the dashboard itself. I used a couple spark lines and a radial dial. They actually had a lot more on there, but I wanted to show some of those examples as I go through. So I have a folder set up to do all of my diagramming in here. So let me get to that real quick. Some of our examples. So example one was the one that I pulled up, but I wanted to kind of start from a blank canvas. When you start from a blank canvas, and I guess I should actually show how to start a diagram. So you can create a diagram through this wizard here, which basically gives you the options of telling you where you want to put it, where you want to save the diagram, and then giving it a name. I don't actually need to do this because it's quite a simple process. And then
one of the things to mention on that, though, even though it's a simple process, I do see it get mixed up quite a lot, that people put that in its own management pack or folder.
Yeah.
We've got a topic, obviously, when you run your service maps out in live maps, that they create their own management packs. If you want a diagram to support that service map somehow, like the ones that you saw in Citrix and Veritas, it's worthwhile putting them in the same folder because that stores it automatically in SCOM. And a diagram is just like a list, it is a group, but what's going to happen with a diagram is you're going to reference a lot of external data, such as Chris is about to show that you can drag other objects onto it and you can drag other groups onto it. If you store it in a management pack that's unsealed, all those references, if you copy it later on or you duplicate it, all those references get dropped unless they're in the same management pack. Something I come across a lot where people copy a dashboard and then complain that it's black, which is not a status color in SCOM, but that just basically says it doesn't know what it's referenced to anymore. So always good to put that, to just think about where you save it. Suggestion for the C-level dashboards, because they tend to be diagrams a lot, put that up at the top of the tree in the folders so that people can get to it easier.
Yeah. So you can also, like other things, right click on a folder, and add, directly add a diagram in here. We didn't talk about this earlier, but I do want to explain one quick thing that I get asked about. So create diagram and create overview dashboard. They both create diagrams in the end. The difference in between the two here is really just the wizard. So when I create a diagram, I'm creating a blank canvas to start off with. Create overview dashboard is a little bit different in the fact that it's automatically going to create tiles for you, but it assumes that you already have certain sub dashboards created that you want to link into it. It does say a maximum of 12 allowed. That's just in the wizard itself so that we can place things out. If you want more than 12, you can do more than 12. It's just we only start 12 with the wizard itself, but it is still a diagram dashboard. It's just automatically populating certain tiles for you to kind of get the ball rolling, like a CIO dashboard or a knock screen type of dashboard or something along those lines.
Yeah, personally, I use it like once, and then after that, I just do a diagram because you have so much more control in it. But it's up to you guys.
Yeah, I tend to use a blank canvas most of the time anyway, whenever I'm doing anything.
Yeah, and you'll notice that this is a diagram just as a visual clue for you. There's a giant tool list up in the top, which will look similar to most people who are used to Paint or Visio, that sort of stuff. For those of you who know me, I refer to this part of Live Maps as a poor man's Visio and a rich man's Paint. Because it's got that same sort of intuition and abilities. For a list, you don't have all of those options. Also, you will notice that there's a square with a gray background. That's going to be rather important on the first step that Chris is going to show you on why that is there. But that's an indication of the size of the view of the dashboard.
Yeah. So a lot of these are pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to go through all of the controls and functions that you have. But one of the key ones to start off with is this one here, your page properties. By the way, you can also just right click and go to page properties anywhere on the dashboard itself. You'll notice here that the predefined sizes, so you can increase, decrease the size of your real estate. That's key if you have a lot of objects that you want to put on it. A lot of questions that I get asked is the fact that these dimensions don't really make sense to a lot of people, that they're not common dimensions. You have to realize that those dimensions are based on the real estate that we have pretty much in the SCOM console and our older web console. They weren't really updated or changed to relate to the portal where you may have a wider screen. So you do have an option to do a custom size. I have a habit of doing like 1200 by 600. This gives me a much wider view. That works well in the portal, as you'll notice that this one here is actually that exact same dimension where I have a little bit less real estate on the side, where in my example for like the Exchange one, I end up having a lot more real estate on the side to make up that's not filling in. So you always have to remember when you're dealing with the page size, where are you going to show it most? If you're going to show it most in the SCOM console, because that's where you need to use it or run it, then one of our pre-designated sizes are going to work well. If you're going to show it mostly in the portal, then you may want to change it to something that's a little bit wider versus taller. Most people have a wide screen nowadays. So page properties, there's more in here. So snap to grid and show grid. I'm just going to kind of show this temporarily. I don't know if you can see it. But obviously I have grid lines. The snap to grid function is nice in the fact that as I add objects, it automatically snaps it to one of my grid lines. However, there are times that we'll talk about in a moment where snap to grid may actually cause you issues, where you may want to uncheck it, because then you have a lot more control of where you can place an object and get basically fine tune it. So I'm going to turn that off right now. Now, background image. This is where you can place a background image to start off with. We do have some that are, pre-canned in here, so like a world map, something along those lines. This is also how we kind of handle the Visio diagrams. We don't actually integrate with the Visio format itself. That's due to the fact that a lot of times we find that the Visio formats are quite large and don't really shrink down well for seeing in a diagram.
Yeah, so keep in mind, we have to store this in SCOM in a management pack. We're not storing it outside, so we have to reduce that. But PNGs are really good quality. You can get a JPEG or a bitmap format, but I recommend the PNGs, best quality.
So obviously you can add a background. This is really well if you want to get a really good clean image on here, especially with Visio. What's nice about this now is that I can turn around and pull over my servers. Yes, it's live, not Memorex. So now I can take a server and drag and drop it and add it onto the location. Now, in this case, especially when you're talking about a Visio, this doesn't look very well because of the fact that I'm already on top of an image. I'm just going to kind of pull this off to the side so you can see it a little bit better. But you have a few options with an object. I can turn around and I can take the image. I can change the image. I can change it to something else. So if I'm adding another object that maybe not on this particular dashboard, I'll have the chance to change it to something that might be a little bit cleaner looking.
One thing to mention in there is if you like the computer images that you see in your Visio diagram, you can actually lift those as individual bitmaps or JPEGs and have them populate into these folders here, so that you could actually change your Windows server away from a 1980s version, which is what SCOM wants to show you, to a 2018 version of a computer picture.
Exactly. So you can change things. And by the way, these folders here, this is kind of an interesting thing to note. These folders here are actually saved, those images in the root of where we store the authoring console. So you can actually, if you have common images that you want to use over and over and over again, you can actually just create a folder and place those images in that location. If you want to know more, we can talk about it a little bit later on. Just, hey, ask the question. We'll kind of go from there to explain where you can actually put those. It's actually quite easy. I can also turn around and take the state icon. I can make it larger. You can actually remove the image. I can change the label. I can remove the label if I want. The minimum that you have to have on here for any object really is the state icon itself. And what we find a lot of people do, and this is kind of how you saw the Exchange one, is you taking an image and placing it on here and showing, okay, there's the health status for that. Now, another common thing to do is not necessarily adding the computer class on here, but adding like the operating system instead, because you can see that the health of my actual computer itself is actually is green. It's just that other things that are rolling up into the computer class are red. So sometimes people don't put the server class on here. They actually put the operating system or the logical disks or something along those lines to give them a better health state of the actual computer. It really depends on where you're placing this. So if you're putting it in a service map, and I'm on the application side, then it may make sense to add, maybe the database or some of the things that actually make sense for the application role in here. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm actually going to clear out my image so I can get back to a blank canvas. You can also add background colors. So if I want to, change it all to blue, it's pretty simple to do this. Or if I want to, fade out the gradient or, give myself some sort of gradient, then you have some of those options. We see some people doing this. So if I really wanted to make it look kind of odd, I can. So, you have a lot of control here on how you want to change things up. Now, the next part really comes down to looking at these objects here. So tile is pretty self-explanatory. You know, it's a tile that shows the health state of the underlying object. Now you can do a couple things with this. I can drag and drop an item in here, or if I want to, I can take like the example diagram that I had before and I can drag it over here. Now what I've done essentially is created drill downs. This drills down into an object, this one drills down into a submap. So if I double click on this, you'll notice that opens up directly into what I had created previously.
Keep in mind, so I get this question quite a lot, is what you're looking at here is cached.
Yeah.
Cache value. So that green that you're seeing there could coincidentally be the green underneath, but this is not the actual true value. If an object turns red, the Live Maps authoring console doesn't constantly ping SCOM like our web page does or like the SCOM consoles do. It does it on the startup, grabs a preview of that and drags it in here.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I also get that when someone's created another diagram, saved it, and then drags it across that they don't actually see a health state. That's correct. It does take SCOM sometimes to roll the health states up. Placing it on here and saving this, you're tagging this group to be updated as well with that information. So you get a warning if you may have canceled that warning out the first time you got it, but there is a warning at the end of the saving process that does say what you see here is not what you'll see in SCOM immediately because of that caching process. That's us writing that into the management pack as that happens.
Yeah, so
what's also interesting to note on this one, so Chris dragged a existing Live Maps group across. Now, Live Maps in the back end automatically writes rules for the health rollups, which is why that has a health state. You can grab a SCOM group, but by default, there are no rules written on that one. So you'll get a great experience. You also, when you drill down, you won't get another diagram like Chris has got there. You'll get our Object Explorer automatically pop up on that group. So you'll get to see all the group members, which do have health states, but the group object, which is what you're actually linking into this box, doesn't. And I will come back and talk to you about why group object boxes are actually really important for speed in your dashboards at the end of this as well.
A couple other diagrams or ways to show the health state besides just the object itself. There's one in here that you can add a process. You know, so if you wanted to create a flow chart, then you can do that. If I want to drag the same dashboard I had before, you'll notice that it kind of highlights it green around the edges, gives the name, still have a state icon. This one happens to be my kind of personal favorite. I like this dashboard item. I'm actually going to grab the OS list here so you can see that I can grab objects from other dashboards from other locations, but then you run into that whole if you don't move this over, or if you're going to be moving it over into another management group type thing, you may lose the references. So it's depends on where you're actually creating this dashboard, where it'll make sense to grab objects from other folders.
And we make that sound really bad, but to be honest, there's a little secret within Live Maps is that if you mess it up and get it in the wrong one, you can always right click on any of those diagrams or dashboards you've created and move it. It's a copy paste experience, but in the background, we're actually rewriting the management packs for you, which, you know, if you had to do that manually in SCOM is a rather long process.
So what I like about this one though is that you get the icon and the state, but you have some other options. So if I come into the state indicators, I can actually fill it and format the text to go back to white. And I've actually kind of created the same look and feel as a tile, but now I have a bigger red icon. I actually have an icon on here that you can choose to disappear if you want to, but you've kind of mimicked the same thing in a rounded edged object versus a tile. So you have a couple options here on how you can place objects and roll up health states and have them go down. So that's pretty much these right here that are of importance. I like to go over the connectors because connectors are interesting because now I can create lines in between two objects. If I just leave it alone and I click OK, then the line itself is just there. However, if I actually go through the process of setting an endpoint, you know, I can select an object on one side and an object on the other side, and now you'll notice that even though this side is red, I actually have a green connector in between the two, which tells me that the object that is connecting in between those, both sides are up. This isn't actually an object itself, it's just looking at the health state of the two objects and saying, hey, whichever one's worse, show me that color. So there are times you can see this be red, this be green, and this one be yellow. So you have control there. Now, there's a couple others that you can do. So you can do like well, this one's always a little fun to work with when you're talking about right angles. There's a curved one that you can actually set points, curve yourself around, and make it look how you need to. So that one can be a little tricky. Straight lines are usually the easiest to deal with. Plus, if I really want to, I can come in here and format the line and add something like directional arrows. So I can. That's kind of how the arrows are in there from that Veritas one.
Yeah, they are actually those connectors. So what I didn't do when creating that service was actually make them live, but you could go in afterwards and just make them live instances for the communication.
The only reason we didn't do it live in that one because it was an out-of-the-box service and we didn't know what we were going to be connecting to. It was going to change in different environments. So, but feel free to double-click on the connector and make it live if that's what you're using.
One of the other ones to mention on this one is if you grab so those are just visual ways to layer it.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some sneaky features in there. I've seen a lot of customers change those images so that World Bull is our standard image for a live maps group. But putting in there, if you've grouped up your databases together, put in an image of a database is a lot more visually cluing for people.
Yep.
But if you drag a group across, Chris, just there and place it on the screen, there is a hidden feature under this one that not many people know.
The health details?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I get that request occasionally from customers is, I would like on my big screen to be able to know what's actually underneath that red without having to go and click on it. So I do this sneaky trick occasionally, and this is where I'm not a big fan of the snap to grid option because it's sort of, you have to be lucky if you get it. So I'd advise if you want to do this trick, knock off the snap for grid and do what Chris is doing, which is just dropping that object behind the box. So it's the exact same object. You got it twice on the view, but now you have a little bit more detailed information about what's going on in the box.
Yeah, so I'd like to explain what this actually shows you. So in this case, I'm showing 15 alerts in the OS list, the same one. 2 of my objects down there are in critical, 0 are in warning, 8 of them are green, and none of them are unmonitored. So you kind of get an idea of what's going on underneath. So it's a way of kind of combining information at the same time. The one thing that I get from people is this right here shows 15 alerts, but it doesn't say what the class, what the category of those alerts, what the state of those alerts are. These are object states. So some people think that, okay, I have 2 critical warnings in there or 2 critical alerts in there, and they're like, well, that doesn't add up, and it's
correct.
It's different information.
Yeah, and so the 15, the only thing to note is those are new alerts. And you could also have a scenario, which I see quite a lot. We use it in our summary widget to do a computer view and show open number of alerts against the computers, because you could have a complete green dashboard, but if someone has failed to close the alerts, which is probably a huge no-no in SCOM, you'll still have alerts open against it, and that's what that value does.
Yep.
And another one to note is that last one on the right. By default, all of the groups that Live Maps writes into the system get a monitor written with it. That monitor is turn the group red if there is an unmonitored component in this group, which you can set off, but by default we do it out of the box. And the reason why we do that is that if computers stop talking to SCOM, the actual health state cannot be trusted. But how SCOM shows that is a gray out, last known health state. So if it was green an hour ago and it stops talking for an hour, you don't know if it's turned to red, but SCOM just shows it as a green highlighted or grayed out tick. That will actually fill up in that right hand side, and the box will go red. And I get a lot of questions, and I think Chris fields them quite a lot at the beginning of usage of Live Maps, is why is that? We do it to encourage the people that are using the dashboards to have conversations with the SCOM owners about why that component's not talking to SCOM. From a monitoring point of view, that's very scary because you're not getting live details on your component. So if there is a failure, SCOM isn't able to tell you about it at that stage. But Live Maps will indicate that that's an unknown monitoring health state.
Yep.
Of course, you can turn it out. We have a couple of customers that don't want to show red. I understand that.
So a couple other things on here is one of the keys for kind of lining things up. You can highlight objects. There's an align and a distribute. That I tried to say that last time during our. Let me get rid of this here. So I placed a few objects here together. If I want to, I can highlight these, and now I can even right click on them here and go to align. And now I have options to align them, so I can align them up and down so they're together, or I can align them all the way to the left. Obviously, that is actually treated as a different object, so I'm just going to delete that for a moment. You also have the option to kind of make sure that they're evenly spaced. So if I come in here and go into shape, you can go into distribute, and now I have options to make sure that they're kind of spaced out equally. So you get a little bit better alignment in this case. So that helps a lot in making sure that things are positioned well. Another thing that you can do, so obviously these are different shapes or different sizes at the time. I have an option in here to come in here and make the same size as the smallest, as the biggest. I can turn around and say make the same size, same width, same height. So you have a few options there to kind of make them look alike, to make sure that that's especially true when I see some people do something like this, where they've shrunk it down to give themselves more room.
One of the things to mention on this one is that you can build a dashboard that has really nice green boxes, similar to the heat maps we do in the summary dashboard. There is a major difference with doing it in a diagram, of course, is that they're static. So they will stay there. They will just change color in the place that they are. So they don't move around. There's no automation on this, which gives you full control of how this wants to go. So if you want it alphabetical, you want it impact analysis wise, you want it logically separated out. I see that quite often, or geographically set out. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of customers that do boxes for a specific office with specific services or specific computers or a network device on the same screen where they show another office. You have full control over that. Obviously, the end user of the dashboard is probably going to give you the best feedback on how to create the dashboards. We get a lot of requests daily to show you some examples of other dashboards, but in the end, it really comes down to your end user and how they want to do it. And don't be scared to go to them and say, hey, this is a draft. Or the other thing when we talk about ITIL is they've probably sit on a lot of design maps. So to give you an example with Veritas, I pulled out a picture from the Veritas web page that shows a design of a generalized Veritas setup. I used that as a background image, and then I just copied it and changed all of the icons into live maps icons, and then removed that image. So I had a template, a stencil basically, that allowed me to create that overview. And I copied that into the infrastructure layer as well. And then I just did the infrastructure components within the service map. And that means, I've got a good starting point to go to teams and say, well, is this what you look like, based on what they think their application looks like as well. So there's good examples in a lot of the application documentation that you can borrow for a good generic Visio diagram. Now, obviously, you probably wanted to have names and official IP ranges for your own environment. That's all possible within these objects as well, that you can actually tag, as Chris was doing. He was changing the title of just a box. But Chris, if you can grab a computer or an object across Windows Server, for example, or something like that. In fact, Windows Server would be a great idea. Yeah, so you have this ability. If you show the label, that's where I'm going for.
Yeah.
So you have this ability in lists as well, but within a diagram, you have an even easier way to just show. So there's a list of all of the known data against that object, and that varies from object. So when I put operating systems into diagrams, I tend to pick the principal name because that shows the computer name, because operating system object name is, strangely enough, operating system. But you could actually right click and just edit this, and you could say Bob's computer or the computer under my desk or something like that, that makes sense to you on the diagram. Yep. Keep in mind, the more alterations you do on this level, the more you have to manually update this yourself. So it might be good for us now to touch on how we can auto update members into the group. But Live Maps at this level doesn't have any idea of what you're drawing. You can draw anything you want in here. You could draw, and some of the team have done that, a picture of me or your staff member in there, and then put red crosses on his eyes and all that stuff. I wouldn't recommend that, but that's possible. Live Maps doesn't know what that is, so there's no intellect behind, okay, I just spotted a new computer that has to fit into the object, because your Visio diagram is really personalized for yourself.
Yeah.
But we do have the membership rules available for you, that you can get objects added to the view as well. Don't know if you want to run a quick membership rules show.
Well, I'll actually show that when I convert the list.
Okay.
Yeah. So One thing I wanted to highlight, just because it keeps happening, you'll notice that as I add objects on here, it kind of remembers the last thing that I did, so that like you'll notice that these don't have, ever since I removed the image, every object that I've added pretty much has shown the same bits of information, like the label, the health state. It hasn't shown that. So one of the things that kind of the trick that we do, especially when you're talking about a Visio diagram or something along those lines, is you put the background in there, you add one object, you set it up so that you've got maybe you want the label off to the right hand side or something along those lines, or maybe you want it to the left, or however you want it. So you place it in place, you've got it, and then every object you add after that's going to have the same properties. We try to remember it so that it makes it easy for you to add objects and don't have to re-customize each one every single time. Now, of course, you may run into a case of like a Visio diagram where you're putting something on, like a map. So if I had a map of the world and I'm placing this in Amsterdam or in the US or something like that, that the label makes sense to be on the right, but then you have another one you want to put on the left, that's fine. Those things we can't control, but at least now you don't have to worry about the image each time. So now, a couple of things that I want to handle here before we move on to the next thing. Image, so you can add an image at any time. You can add one of the stocked images, or you can browse and grab your own image. So a lot of people will turn around and grab their own company logo on here, add that, put it in the corner, something along those lines. Maybe it's an image that you need that makes sense it could be for the object. I've seen people add a custom image this way next to a health state. You can also add a hotspot over this. Hotspot itself can be linked into one of the objects that's already on the diagram itself. You can go to another dashboard if you want, or you can go to a web page. So I can put so now that links directly into our website. Or a common thing I see for this actually is the other one down at the bottom where it's an email address. Either the website or the email address. We've got a few people that have actually put a web logo and an email logo, and for those people that are running in help desk or looking at it, the email goes directly to the support team that's responsible for this application or something along those lines, so that whoever's looking at it, they see something red or need to update something, they can just simply hit it, open up the email, boom, they're off to the races.
One of the other things as a suggestion in there, so Chris just added our webpage, the normalsufficient.com, but if you grab a static URL from our portal, you can actually, and I do this one quite often when we do a service map. A common conversion is, and Chris will show you just now, is to get the application layer set up. And then from there, you also want to see, or from the infrastructure layer even, you want to see not only how the operating system and disks are doing, but you also want to see other stuff on the computer that's been excluded from the service map. Just place a hotspot somewhere. I know some people who do an administration full stop in the corner, just to remind them that it's there, that they can click in that area, and then they go to the technical dashboard, which gives you obviously the top end performing of that service, or the number of alerts that are open against the computers, which are not shown in the service, that sort of stuff. So you could interlink one part of the front end to this back end dashboard as well.
So, and that's really nice, especially when you're looking at the SCOM console. It'll open up a tab and open up a browser so you can see the summary dashboard that's linked into it. All right, so the last one is that I'll talk about here for at least the controls that you have is this performance shape. Performance shape allows you to pretty much add a performance counter. Now this is kind of a 1-for-1 ratio. So if I have several performance counters that I have to add, unfortunately, I have to go through this process for each time.
Well, I'd highly recommend in that state, at the bottom, you have a tab for performance counters, which is a lot more intuitive.
Exactly. But the nice thing about this one is I have other options that I can add in here. So if you're going to automatically see the objects that are on here, but you can go through and look up, if you want to see a performance counter for an object that actually doesn't exist on this particular dashboard, you can do it.
Yeah, so imagine like you've done a really great dashboard, but you want to see the network connections from a network device that's sitting on a router or a load balancer that's not in the map, but is really crucial for this application. If it's in SCOM and it's not on the dashboard, use this one to go get that value.
Yeah, so I can come in here, look at, in the case of, an operating system or something along those lines, I want to go grab, processor, then you have these options to go grab it. You can change the colors of how it looks, in the label. This label ends up usually being pretty darn long, but so I usually kind of shrink it up. But now I actually have a small performance graph that I can, I can make it larger. You can do the spark lines. It does give you updated information. And just so you know, as you're looking at it through the portal or through the SCOM console, whenever we do a refresh, we'll go get the last value from the data warehouse. So it will constantly refresh this data as time goes on.
Yeah, and if you use the spark lines, then obviously it has that historical walking average then for you.
Not the prettiest picture, but it gets our point across for today. All right, so list. This is just I did this list through a membership rule to add objects in here. Go ahead.
Before you dive into that one, so when you create service maps, which is generally encouraged as the first time to go, we have a lot of out-of-the-box service maps. But when you create your own service maps, you're going to get automatically 3 dashboards built for you. The end user, the application, the infrastructure. They all start out live as a list, exactly like this.
Exactly. And what we find is a lot of people take the application side of that and convert the application to a diagram. And that function is right here. So I can convert this to a diagram.
So interesting to note on this, to go back, and I know we've got a question from someone about where to save the diagrams. If you do it this way, if you've created a service will by default try to attempt to create its own management pack, unless you've chosen one that you've got for overrides, for example. If you do that convert, it doesn't move the diagram at all into another management pack or make a copy of it. It just switches a setting on the XML level in that management pack for that dashboard.
Yep.
So this also for licensing for all the customers doesn't take up a dashboard license for you. It's just re-editing the one that you have.
This was already converted in our test before, so that's why this one particular object is actually here.
Just hit delete, it'll pop out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the key for this, though, to realize is that when you have membership rules and objects appear because of the membership rule, they're always going to be placed off to the side as an unplaced member. That's because we don't know where you want to put them. At this point, you have the option to drag and drop and add them on there, or turn around and add a tile and take that one and drag it into here. So you can change things around as you see fit. Now, as your membership rule, so let's say you've diagrammed this out, you have everything exactly where you want it. 3 months down the road, you add a new server, it matches the rule, all of a sudden it gets added to the list. Well, we're going to always place that into the unplaced member side for you to add on. Now, the nice thing though is that we still count that health against this group. So in the portal, I don't actually have one up, but in the portal, there'll be a little icon up here that'll indicate that you have an unplaced member, so that you can still see the health state of that member and know that the health is starting to roll up for it. So that's kind of a key for you to look at for those, and we do start calculating things up there.
Yeah, so you can see there is a bit of a limitation on the membership rules for diagrams. Yeah. In the fact that a diagram is a very visual controlled area, where a membership rule doesn't worry about those visual controls. I tend to advise you from the service maps, as Chris and I keep mentioning, but the application layer is where you're probably in your service is going to have a diagram where you'll have boxes separated out. Have a look at any one of our out-of-the-box dashboards, like Active Directory is a good example, where you have 6 boxes. You drill down, and the ones underneath the boxes tend to be lists, because once you get down into that, moving away from trying to have to show your entire application on a single screen into breaking it up and giving it a little bit more logical sense of navigation, however that is for you, geographical, component-wise, support-wise, it gets a lot easier to work with the diagrams, and they get easier for you to manage, where you don't have to put dynamic lists like this on top of it, but they're still there. I'm not sure, Chris, if you can show this list in the portal, just to show people what happens if you leave the members in the unplaced members.
I'll save this and we'll get going on it.
Yeah, because I get this request a few times where people say, hey, I've added these components through a dynamic rule, but I don't see them in the portal. It can take some time for the portal to re-register that you've gone into a diagram. 5-10 minutes with it. But the members are actually still there because membership rules happen on population level faster. How we show that within the web page is hopefully if we can get it on this environment.
Let's see if it's already done it.
Yeah.
Let me go find it real quick. It's not one of the ones I saved as a favorite.
Yeah, sorry to take you off script here.
Yeah,
That's what
fine.
this is all about.
This is what we do every single time. So
yeah, was it that one there?
As we're going through. So there's the unplaced members.
Yeah, so we place an icon on there. So the members roll up their health state to the group already. So if this diagram was sitting on another diagram or dashboard somewhere, you would see the roll up no matter where the members are in the view. But if you haven't placed them or the rule discovers new objects, then they'll actually be placed in that information icon bar, which only shows if you have unplaced members. Here's also something to note. If your member is put there by a dynamic rule and that object or computer gets removed from the environment, Live Maps will leave a box behind saying object missing, I think it is.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, or instance missing, object missing.
No,
I don't remember it that well, but you'll get a placeholder that says something was here. We can't find a reference for it anymore in the data warehouse. Please have a look at it. And you will have to manually remove that if that computer doesn't have to get replaced by something else.
Templates. Well, a lot of questions that we get from, okay, I want a consistent look and feel across my dashboards. And so, how can we do a template? That's a common request. And so one of the things you can do is actually create a template file. So I'll open this up so you can see it. This is my diagram template. Basically, it just has logo with already the hotspot and so support information or something along those lines. Well, one of the nice things that you can do over here is you can do this import existing dashboard. That will basically give you a warning because it's going to tell you that everything that you have on this dashboard is about to be rewritten. We're basically taking the XML that we had before and wiping it out and replacing it with the XML that is in from your template. So
for process-wise and our best practice, do this before you start adding objects to your diagram because they will get removed and you'll have to do the work again.
Exactly. So you can do this even in services. So sometimes people, here's my template. I want to copy this into my end user, my application, my infrastructure, or maybe just the application, however you see fit. But that gives you the ability to give yourself a template. Now you'll notice that it takes a little bit of time because we're actually taking the XML and moving things around. But here's the exact same thing. My clone example, giving me my width that I want. So it does obviously take a license. So for some people that are on a set number of views, this does count as a license because it's technically still a dashboard within SCOM. But it is a way to do this.
Yeah, it doesn't kill the template. As you can see in Chris's folders on the left, the diagram template, the one he copied from, is still there. So obviously that can be cloned again and again and again. What's also worthwhile to note is that this is a very good technique if you've got things like Chris has got on there where the hotspot is already stored and logos are inserted and all that. You could also do this with a simple Visio trick, which is have a JPEG and have that as your template. If you have a style in Visio that's a lot easier for you to pull out, just put that as a JPEG. The trick that I want to mention, that one, Chris, if you can show the page properties again. I think we can run it up from here, can't we? Yeah. So you have background image as the import for the Visios that we mentioned. So when you select there, you get a drop down under the maps folder. What that's actually doing is that's just going and querying a folder that's sitting on the program files, Vision Live Maps authoring folder, and checking what's in there. You could, as a user, actually modify those folders or add a folder for your own house styles and templates. We have customers doing that quite a lot. It just saves you having to press browse and search for this thing the whole time. It's actually then stored within the Live Maps program.
Yeah, that's in here. Vision, Live Maps 2012, authoring console.
Yeah, so anything for that background stuff is under the Maps folder. So if you want to add a folder, add it in here.
Yep.
And for the images, so this is the other one.
Yeah, this is all of those little tabs that we had across when we wanted to replace an image or something like that. That's all in here. So nothing stops you from, you'll notice we have several. Yours probably doesn't have this many. But if I wanted to, I could add a new folder and then turn around and copy in, okay, here's the company logo, here's some common images that we want to use for our own purpose, and that way you have those there already. So instead of going out and finding them each time, kind of makes it an easy spot to put them.
Yeah, it's about 3 clicks less, I find, and especially if you're going to template stuff, with images that you're regularly going to use, I'd recommend it here.
Yep. Okay. Was there anything else? We did pretty much everything I think on our agenda.
You had cloning dashboards. That was the
Oh.
last one on the agenda, so we've just
Yeah.
done that. Yeah.
Yep. You can also, and this is why I opened this up in the folder view. That wasn't really on the thing, but he did mention it earlier that you can actually copy and paste a dashboard into a different location. So if you had a template that you wanted to use, you could do it that way too. If you wanted to create like a new dashboard in a different folder, and so the only thing you can't do is copy and then paste it directly into the same folder, because it's still the same object name and things of that nature. So
yeah, you'll get an error that says along the lines of ready exists or something like that.
Yeah.
Because we can't write worse words than that in the error.
Exactly.
But,
so if you wanted to do something like that, then a lot of times I recommend creating a new folder and say, hey, these are all my templates, and then you can just copy it into other locations as you see fit.
Yeah, and as you can start seeing there, Chris, if you could just expand. So what we're doing here, that's the live maps folder. That's where most people plow or store a lot of the groups and dashboards they have. But underneath the live maps folder, there's also a services folder, which is where all of the services get referenced from us. No matter what management packs you store them in, they'll be available here.
Yeah.
And under the Citrix one, if you could just expand. So within a service map, there are the dashboards map. Now, that's a very basic Citrix one. If you can grab the more complex one.
Yeah.
So this is an example of a very complex service where you guys will have this as well. If you start using diagrams and splitting them out into those boxes, you're going to start wanting to store your dashboards in that folder as well. So it builds up like this. I'd recommend putting them in the dashboards folder. Doesn't really matter where you store them. You can store them one level up, but as long as they're in that service name, then they will automatically be stored in the management pack for the service, which is best practice, because that means that you can export that management pack and save all of your dashboards. Mm-hmm. Anything that's saved in the live maps folder will generally, you'll have to export the live maps authoring library, I think it is. If you
live maps authoring.
Yeah, if you can just scroll up, pick one and show properties, then it will be.
It won't be in those because I purposely had those in a different one.
Yeah, live maps authoring. So that's an unsealed MP that you can back up, and if you back that up, anything that's saved in there dashboard wise is saved for you. And which means that if you ever run into anything or you want to backtrack on a dashboard, you can re-import it in there. Now we mentioned on I think the first session we talked about how if you just want to get one dashboard backed up, how to move that across. So feel free to reference that one. But for your service maps and diagrams you add to service maps, I'd recommend in the dashboards group there. One thing before we dive into this, there is some best practice around diagramming in your services. So what I tend to see with customers is they run their own service up, they go into the application layer, for example, and they add all of the components of the application layer. That works fine if you've got a pretty medium-sized application, but if we were to do it for Citrix, which I tried, you'll be looking at potentially 150 plus instances of objects. Now, if you've ever done that and you've sent us an email saying that that dashboard is slow, the first thing you'll get back from us if we get back onto the session with you is, as a recommendation, we would recommend that you stop at about 20 objects. Because the more objects you put onto a dashboard, the more health states live maps has to query when it pulls the dashboard up. Diagrams are a great way to then separate out those components and build them into subgroups in the diagram. So as soon as you're over 20 or 30, really depends on the object. I find 30 computers is really slow because it's not just a computer. It
also depends on the SCOM environment too.
Of course, yeah.
I've had some that I've had 50 without a problem, but then I've had some that I've had 10 and the whole SCOM environment is extremely slow. So.
Yeah, and querying against the logical disk is different than querying against the computer as well. So you really have to take into mind your dashboard. But if you're feeling it's slow, convert the list into a diagram, create logical boxes that make sense for that application. So, by standard default, I'd recommend things like database, Windows services, web service, so on as boxes, and then subgroup them down. because essentially the diagram then only when it gets pulled up has to call a health state of a group. And that's one object in SCOM, and that's very easy for us to call. We don't actually call the health states of all the objects underneath it when you pull that dashboard up. That only happens when you drill down, and that's us saving load on SCOM, and definitely a better way to experience your live maps. Yeah, so April 26th, we're going to be touching on the topic security modeling. And obviously we'll be a bit closer to start showing you guys some other stuff that we're doing as well. So feel free to join in. If again, the request is out there, if you guys have any topics you want us to cover, let us know. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure again.
Thank you.